Hi, good morning, everybody. Fox 2 meteorologist Chris Higgins here. Figured we'd give you a Friday morning weather update. It's the coldest morning of the season so far as we check the temperatures as of about 8 o'clock this morning. A little bit less cold on the Illinois side of the river. There's a pocket of low-level cloudiness which has blanketed some parts of the region overnight, and that's prevented a sharp drop-off. But still, everybody down well below freezing, 25 at Alton, 26 up at St. Charles. You can see the teens most everywhere else, 19 in the Valley and Chesterfield in the cold spot this morning down there in Cook Station. Their current temperature checking in at 15 degrees. So anybody who hadn't received a killing hard freeze up to this point has now this morning. Current surface analysis shows the front that passed through late several days ago and eventually brought us the snow is now well down to the south along the Gulf Coast and down into the Gulf of Mexico. The big weather story today, high pressure moving in. It's the coldest day of the season after the coldest morning of the season. The high actually centered down over Oklahoma and Texas. And starting to see the wintry precipitation break out over western Texas early this morning, and this inverted trough over the western Gulf of Mexico will become the next storm system. That's the one that's going to spread the unusually wintry weather along the Gulf Coast from Houston to Lake Charles, across portions of central and southern Mississippi, and even into coastal sections of Alabama and Mississippi before all is said and done. So wintry scenario for those folks down there. For us, it looks like the high pressure stays in control. Generally looking at cold temperatures, we will struggle to warm into the low to mid 30s later on this afternoon. Time to review the satellite for this morning, and key features that we're watching. First of all, the cold air pump in this upper level low pressure system and trough over the Great Lakes. That is feeding in the cold air at all levels across the nation's midsection. It's also feeding it down to the Gulf Coast, where the southern jet stream is pumping moisture up into and over the top of that cold dome. And you can see the expanding area of cloudiness in the cold air. That's the developing wintry situation for Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and eventually into Alabama. Our weather feature of greatest interest looking ahead in time is this digging trough over the Pacific Northwest. This thing will gradually build south and southeast, and then pieces of it will start to kick out to the east into the mid-Mississippi Valley, and that's where the questions lie in the long-term forecast. Several chunks of energy coming out of that thing towards us into the weekend, and especially during the week next week. Time to do a little model diagnostics, and the big weather feature that we're monitoring the next several days will be this trough off the west coast and over the Colorado and the western Rockies. This thing is going to send pieces of energy eastward into the mid-Mississippi Valley and keep our weather pretty unsettled beginning Sunday night and into Monday, and then on and off during the week next week. The question mark is these short waves or ripples in the upper levels kick east is just how cold the atmosphere is going to be. Now, with this first one, as I said in my discussion last night, I have some concerns about there being more warm air available than you might normally think. Center of high pressure moves off to the east through the Appalachians, but a pretty strong southerly flow is developing on the backside of that in advance of the surface cold front. And you can see here on the NAM, this is the 12Z NAM just rolling in, that the 540 line, the thickness line for 540, which is generally used as one of the rain snow indicators, has already lifted northward. This is midday on Sunday. And it shows kind of the evidence of a bit of a warm wedge trying to work up ahead of that front. That shows up even more pronouncedly down here on the 850 millibar chart, where you see this the zero line starting to really jut up pretty sharply across the Missouri Ozarks. Yes, this is 54 hours out on the NAM's, past the NAM's reliability stage, but I think it's trying to tell us something there, and that something is that there's going to be fairly strong warm air advection in advance of that surface front. Now, the question is how much of that warm air makes it down to the surface. I think it's enough to keep us above freezing, at least initially, with the precipitation, so definitely looking at a mixed mode at the very least of precipitation over the bi-state area Sunday night and Monday, if and when precipitation does break out. This is the 12Z 60-hour NAM, so this takes us into Sunday evening. And you can see that little warm wedge even more pronounced on this one. First of all, we'll come over here to the 500 millibar chart. There's the shortwave. That's a pretty strong shortwave kicking out. There's enough positive vorticity advection in advance of that and warm air advection at low and mid levels. The precipitation is going to be breaking out along in advance of this feature as it moves to the east. Here's the surface again. You can see the southerly flow tapping into the moisture. There's the 540 line, and it has lifted north of St. Louis at that point, ahead of the cold front. Shows up also down here on the 850 chart. You can see strong thermal packing with the front off to the northwest of St. Louis, but there's this little wedge right ahead of it that is at least going to guarantee temperatures warm enough to start the precipitation as a mixture. But I do still believe that things will gradually kick over to all snow briefly and light, but I do think the transition will be from mixed mode precipitation over to snow. It's a pretty quick hit. There's not a ton of moisture available, and this thing is moving pretty quickly. Now, going a little bit deeper into the future, we're going to use the long-term models aren't in yet for this morning, so I'm going to use the Canadian as a good basis at this point for the longer term. And as I push us forward through time here, you'll see how the progression of this pattern unfolds. Oops, went too far. Let's try this again. All right, let's take you into Monday evening, in fact, and the first system has exited off to the east. The second system taking shape out to the west. Now, something that's important here, up until now, we've had a pretty good blocking pattern out here to the west. The models, watch this as I loop it forward in time, the model's trying to undercut that ridge over Alaska and bring energy through. That's the impetus for kicking out the storm system from the west, is this wavelength becomes short enough that as this upper level system kicks in, it kicks out the southwest and western trough, and that becomes a large storm system over the midsection of the country middle of next week. I'm not entirely sure that's going to happen. The models have shown a tendency to try and undercut this before in the last couple of weeks, and it hasn't happened. Eventually it will happen, but we'll have to wait and see, because as even here, as you can see, this piece of energy deflects back up to the north and around. So I'm not sure that's enough to dislodge this thing out of the southwest. So what I still am waiting to see, and the 12Z models will be interesting to see if a larger piece of energy remains locked out here to the west. That being the case, if models being what they are, if they turn out to be correct and the bigger chunk of energy does come out in a single wave, I have no problem with the Canadians' transition here, bringing a very strong system from southwest Missouri up towards Chicago, one that would be spreading a healthy amount of snow for our friends from Kansas City to Des Moines up to the west side of Chicago, Milwaukee, and Madison. That right now certainly would seem to be the favored region for snowfall with the midweek storm, not so much here in St. Louis. One thing it is certain is once that thing kicks through, the door will open to even more cold air coming in from Canada. So it'll be an interesting pattern to watch over the next several days. Certainly can't rule out some snowfall for us the middle of the week. This track can change dramatically, especially if the main chunk of energy remains stuck out over the west, which I think could happen, and we get these smaller ripples of low pressure coming out. So a lot of questions still going into next week.